In the late 70s, I was working in the Ontario public health system in Kingston. I was teaching at Queen's University, and I was bored to death, and I decided to leave and move to the federal government. I was in charge of the viral surveillance section, and we looked at what's the incidence of various virus infections across Canada. And when I made the move in '83, HIV really had just appeared significantly on the scene in Canada. Bob Gallo was the director of the National Cancer Institute at the National Institutes of Health. Bob published 3 papers in Science in which he described the epidemiology of HIV, he described the test for the presence of antibodies to HIV, and then he started to describe the virus itself. I suggested to the people in Ottawa that one of us from the Center for Disease Control go down to Gallo's lab, pick up the technology. At the time, none of my colleagues were interested. We knew a lot of people were dying from it, and I think people were more comfortable staying away from the virus. I made a decision to go because I felt I was a public health officer and it was my responsibility to go. I think Bob Gallo is probably the smartest scientist I ever met. He is an amazing guy. He was so good to Canada. He gave us the materials to test for HIV probably for 5 years without us having to buy anything. I took samples with me that were collected by Dr. Chris Soukas, and they were from children with hemophilia. And so I tested them, and we got the results, to confirm results. I mean, in my heart, when I did that testing, I knew this was really bad news, but that was our introduction to Canada. When I came back, Chris and I decided to meet, and it was a very profound meeting in that so many of the children with severe hemophilia were HIV positive. I went to a session in Peterborough, and there was an actor, and I'm sure his name was James St. James. He really gave an eloquent talk that day. And he had HIV disease, and he talked about what it meant for his life and how difficult his life was, but how he wasn't going to quit. He made a profound effect on me. I thought, this is one neat guy. And unfortunately, he died the next year. But when I saw him, I thought, wow, you better get in the game, and I did. There was Factor VIII that was heat treated, and it was used extensively in Canada. We found that some of the children who received no other Factor VIII but this heat-treated material seroconverted. So how did they get infected? And the answer was the heat treatment wasn't adequate. And there was a big confrontation over that. I'd come across at international meetings individuals who were in the business of supplying blood products. I'm not talking about Red Cross people now. These are private blood banking companies. In the early days had collected material from Africa, and they were making clotting factor out of the blood collected in Africa, and my God, you knew it was the highest risk possible. And yet they were making this material and selling it around the world. And these were Canadians, and I never figured out how they could do that. I mean, what were they thinking? Now, I was working at that time, not for the Center for Disease Control, but I was working for the Federal Center for AIDS. The government was under pressure to reduce the deficit, so there was a move within government to take the resources from the Federal Center for AIDS and redistribute this money through the various branches of the government. And this was a fight about resources. And so the minister said to me, he said, you need to make the Federal Center for AIDS disappear. And I said, fine. And he said, I don't care what you do, make it disappear, because If you don't, you're gone. So the center will be closing. I got everybody a job. They went everywhere. But the federal government from that point on didn't have a central agency that was accountable for HIV. But as I said, it was all over money and politics. Remember, HIV has the genome of HIV consists of the GAG gene, the envelope gene, and the Pol gene. And the Pol gene you might think is the polymerase gene, but in fact it's the politics gene. And HIV has got its own politics gene. And that was politics at its worst. They hired me to actually found the center and start the center, and I came out in April of 1992, and I was really the first person here. I met Irene Goldstone and Brian Harrigan right away, and we were the ones who started to lay the groundwork. The Center for Excellence for HIV was charged with doing research into the conditions that would improve the lives of people who had HIV disease. That summer, so I arrived in April, that summer I ran into the deputy minister at the airport, and the deputy minister says to me, by the way, we left something out of your job description, because remember, they had been assailed over the distribution of ACT. We want you folks to distribute the antiretroviral drugs, and you'll do it for us, but you need to have some type of guidelines around the use. We agreed that we would do this, but we would make our decision based on evidence. This is a profound thing. You have to understand, governments don't usually make decisions, especially in health, around the evidence. It's who screams the loudest and whatever. And we actually set a system up in 1992 where we would look at the evidence and look at the benefit of drugs, and that would lead us down the road of evidence-based medicine. I made a decision back in '92. I put members from the community organizations from AIDS Vancouver on all of our steering committees, and I learned a lot from these folks. When I came to BC, you find out what's really going on, and you soon become an advocate. It is impossible to be the director of the center if you don't take advocacy seriously. When I made the decision, Julio was there. Julio was a great guy. He's done a great job. It wasn't as if the center was going to go backwards. The center has continued to go forward. Once I left, I realized I missed the young people too much. When you're working at that level, it's tough on your family, because I spent half of my time somewhere else, never able to figure out how to do everything. I was committed to the center. We did a fabulous job, and that's who I am. And I would never change that. Unfortunately, I think my family life suffered because I spent so much time away from home. Vancouver Injection Drug User Study. It came after the studies with gay men, but when I set it up, I and Stephanie and Dave Patrick, we hung in there. We were advised not to do it by the university. We were advised not to do it by the hospital and not to do it by the government. But you know what? It was the right thing to do. Boy, we sure made enemies. And look where Vitus went. Not only did we describe epidemic, we decentralized needle exchange, we got a supervised injection site, we got a heroin trial. That all came from Vitus. It was the right thing to do, and sometimes you just have to have the courage to say, kiss off, I'm doing it because it's right. If you want to change things, sometimes you have to get uncomfortable. And you got to stand up and say, this isn't right. And the folks with HIV, and most of them are dead now, and many of them were my friends, they stood up and said, you need to change how you approach this disease. And that's a powerful, powerful lesson. And people say to me, well, how come you were able to do this? I took them on. We took them on. We all were a group, and we approached them together, and we changed their minds.